He was just a stranger shivering in the rain, and all she had was her late grandfather's old jacket. She gave it to him without thinking twice. But 2 days later, a helicopter landed in her front yard, and the man she helped stepped out with a smile that would not only change her life, but honor a legacy she thought was long gone. Storytelling and beyond, real stories that warm the soul, inspire the heart, and prove that kindness still matters. Subscribe now and never miss another unforgettable journey. It was the kind of cold that crept through your skin and settled deep in your bones. Rain drizzled over the campus like a sad melody, and most students had long disappeared into warm dorm rooms or the cozy library. But not Lily Bennett. She stood beneath the canopy of the campus thrift stall she volunteered at every Tuesday, huddled in a bulky sweater, trying to keep the sleeves of her windbreaker from getting wet as she sorted through a new pile of clothing donations. Most of what came in was forgettable, faded jeans, torn sweatshirts, mismatched gloves. But today, tucked at the very bottom of a reusable grocery bag, was something that made her stop and inhale sharply. A brown, old-fashioned military-style jacket. It was worn, its collar a bit frayed, and it carried the unmistakable scent of aged leather, cedarwood, and pipe tobacco. Her grandfather's scent. Lily's eyes welled up as her fingers ran over the buttons. She had donated it herself, just that morning, after 2 months of keeping it at the back of her closet. It had belonged to Franklin Bennett, a proud Korean War veteran and the man who had practically raised her after her parents' divorce. The jacket was his signature piece, a story he wore like armor. He used to say, "This jacket's been through war, heartbreak, and winters tougher than most people's lives. But it always kept me standing." She hadn't been able to let it go. Until now. Somehow, today felt like the right day to release it. To let it warm someone else the way it once protected him. The afternoon dragged on with barely a customer in sight. But just as Lily began folding up the last few items, she caught sight of a man standing a few feet away near the trees. He was older, maybe in his late 50s. Tall, lean, and shivering beneath the weight of the rain. His shoes were soaked through, and his thin, tattered hoodie did little to protect him from the cold. He didn't look like a student, or even a local. He looked lost. Lily grabbed the last umbrella from the stand and ran toward him. "Sir," she called over the rain. "Are you okay?" He hesitated, his eyes sharp but kind. "Just passing through." "I'm fine." But his trembling hands and chattering teeth told a different story. Without waiting for him to ask, she gently guided him toward the stall. "Hold on," she said, rummaging through the pile. She found it, the jacket. Still damp from the morning's drizzle but warmer than anything he had on. "This was my granddad's," she said quietly, brushing off a thread. "He always said it was meant to protect people. I think it's meant for you now." The man looked stunned. "I can't accept something so personal." "It's not mine anymore," Lily smiled. "It's yours." His hands shook slightly as he slid his arms into the sleeves. The fit was snug, perfect. Like it was made for him. He didn't speak, just nodded, as if 100 thoughts were swirling behind those tired eyes. Then, just as silently as he had appeared, he turned and walked off into the rain. No name. No goodbye. Lily stood there for a moment, watching him disappear around the corner, the brown jacket clinging to his frame. She felt lighter. As if she'd passed something on, not just fabric and stitches, but warmth, protection, maybe even healing. She thought that was the end of it. She had no idea that the man she just helped wasn't some lost wanderer. And he wouldn't stay a stranger for long. He walked away into the rain wearing her grandfather's jacket, and Lily thought she'd never see him again. But just 2 days later, the sound of a helicopter landing in her front yard would shake the ground and everything she thought she knew about the man she helped. Because he wasn't homeless. He wasn't lost. He was a billionaire in disguise, and he had come back for her. Storytelling and beyond, heart-touching, real-life inspired stories that move you. Subscribe now and witness kindness come full circle. It was Friday afternoon, 2 days after the encounter, and Lily was at home with her headphones in, half listening to a podcast while finishing a paper on sustainable community projects. The storm from earlier in the week had cleared, leaving a pale blue sky above her family's old farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Just as she saved her document, the ground began to tremble faintly. The windows rattled. And then came the unmistakable, thumping roar of helicopter blades. She froze. What in the world? Her dog, Marley, barked wildly and bolted toward the front yard. Lily scrambled to the window, and what she saw next made her drop everything. A black and silver helicopter, sleek, powerful, with tinted windows and the letters Rainer Aerotech emblazoned across the side, was descending in the wide open field just beyond their porch. Dust flew. Trees bent. The clothesline snapped. By the time Lily opened the door, neighbors were peeking out from across the road, phones raised, mouths open. And then the door of the helicopter slid open. Out stepped the same man she had helped 2 days ago, now wearing a tailored charcoal coat, a crisp white shirt, and dark slacks. But draped neatly over one arm was her grandfather's brown jacket. Lily's heart slammed against her ribs. He walked with calm purpose through the settling wind, his silver hair combed back, his posture proud and regal. Dawn was the shivering stranger. In his place stood a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine. He smiled gently. "Miss Bennett?" Lily stepped forward, breath caught in her throat. "Yes." He extended his hand. "Douglas Rainer, CEO of Rainer Aerotech." Her brain tried to process it. The name sounded vaguely familiar, tech, engineering, something big. "I wanted to thank you. Not just for the jacket, but for something far greater." Lily blinked, completely stunned. "I was conducting a personal, confidential initiative, living undercover to observe how our society treats those who fall through the cracks. I've been in disguise for over a month. Testing communities. Watching people." He held up the jacket. "But this reminded me who I was. Not the title. Not the money. But the man I used to be. Before the suits. Before the noise." Lily's voice finally came out in a whisper. "I didn't know." "You weren't supposed to," Douglas replied warmly. "That's what made your gesture so powerful. You didn't help me because of who I was. You helped me because of who you are." She felt a lump rise in her throat. Douglas reached into his coat and handed her a cream-colored envelope, sealed with gold trim. Inside was a personal grant, a full scholarship to the university of her choice. Tuition, housing, books, all covered. But it didn't stop there. There was a second envelope, this one containing a letter of internship and mentorship with Rainer Aerotech, giving her direct access to their youth-led nonprofit innovation board. "I've been looking for someone like you," he said. "Someone grounded, empathetic, and capable of creating real solutions for real people." Lily's knees nearly buckled. She could barely breathe. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Then don't say anything," he smiled. "Just accept it. You gave without expectation. Now let me give with intention." Behind him, the helicopter pilot gave a thumbs up from the cockpit. Douglas turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing," he said, gently unfolding the jacket. "Would you mind if I kept this?" Lily nodded, tears forming. It was always meant to help someone. Just like Grandpa wanted. He gave a nod of deep respect and stepped back toward the aircraft. As the blades spun again, kicking up wind and awe in equal measure, Lily stood in the middle of her lawn, stunned, tearful, heart racing. Because in a world where kindness is often ignored, her one act had just opened a door she never even knew existed. And she had a feeling, this was just the beginning. 3 weeks later, Lily stood on the 37th floor of the Rainer Aerotech headquarters in Manhattan, clutching a visitor badge and staring out over the skyline with disbelief in her eyes. She had never imagined herself in New York. Never stood inside an elevator lined with brushed gold. Never even worn business heels before. But now, here she was dressed in a navy blue blazer, her resume tucked under one arm, standing in a room full of rising tech interns, most of them from Ivy League schools and prestigious backgrounds. But she wasn't there by chance. She was there because of something deeper, something you couldn't learn in a classroom or write on a LinkedIn profile. Kindness. Douglas Rayner had stayed true to every promise. Within days of the encounter on her front lawn, Lily had been flown to the city, paired with a mentor, and enrolled in the firm's Social Tech Impact Program, a branch of the company focused on real-world community solutions using accessible technology. But that morning, as she stepped into the glass atrium with floor-to-ceiling windows, she found herself drawn to a large display in the center of the lobby. People passed by casually, barely glancing. But Lily stopped in her tracks. It was a display case, illuminated softly from within. Inside, neatly arranged on a black velvet platform, was her grandfather's brown jacket. It had been professionally restored, but not altered. The buttons still bore slight scratches. The inner lining still had the tiny cigarette burn her grandfather once laughed about. But what made Lily gasp was the golden plaque beneath it, which read, "The jacket that carried a legacy. Worn by a veteran. Gifted by his granddaughter." A symbol of dignity, kindness, and second chances. This simple act of humanity reignited our mission to build a better future. Dedicated by Douglas Rayner. March 12, 2025. Lily's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't just a coat anymore. It was a monument to something good in a world often too fast to care. She stood silently in front of it until Douglas approached from behind. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I hope you don't mind," he said. "I don't," she whispered. I didn't think it meant that much." He smiled. "It meant everything. You reminded me who I was. You reminded all of us what leadership should look like. That's why I've added you to the Leadership Mentorship Program. You'll be working with us directly on our new Veteran Uplift platform." Lily turned to him in disbelief. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," he said, his smile widening. "Who better to design programs for real people than someone who never forgot what real people need?" Over the next few weeks, Lily became more than just a face in the building. She presented ideas at roundtable meetings. She developed a platform to connect local businesses with homeless veterans seeking employment. She even joined the team organizing Rayner Aerotech's annual community gala. But nothing made her prouder than when visiting veterans would walk past the jacket in the lobby, pause, touch the glass, and smile. Some even saluted. They didn't know Lily was the one who had given it up. She never told them. Because the story wasn't about her. It was about a man who wore it through hardship, and a world that desperately needed to remember the value of dignity. Still, every now and then, she'd pass by that glass case, press her palm softly against it, and whisper just one word. "Grandpa." Because in the end, she hadn't lost his jacket. She had shared it with the world. And now, it was protecting far more than just one man. A full year had passed. Spring had returned to the small town where it all began, the same farm, the same sky, and the same girl, only she wasn't the same anymore. Lily Bennett stood in front of the mirror, straightening the collar of her crisp navy blouse. Draped over her shoulders was her grandfather's old brown jacket, the real one, the original. Douglas had returned it to her personally, not long after the lobby replica was framed, saying, "Its journey is far from over." Today, it was going with her. Out in the yard, her mother waved up at the sky as a now familiar Rayner Aerotech helicopter descended gently once again into their field. This time, it didn't feel surreal. It felt right. Lily stepped aboard with confidence, greeted warmly by the same pilot, now an old friend. "Ready for the next chapter, Miss Bennett?" he asked with a grin. Born ready, she smiled. Today, she was flying not to New York, but to Geneva, where she would address a panel at the United Nations Youth Global Forum on Social Innovation, representing Rayner Aerotech and sharing her journey from college thrift volunteer to director of community outreach. But more than that, she was presenting a pilot project, one she had developed with Douglas's support, called Jackets for Dignity. The concept was simple but revolutionary, a global initiative that distributed repurposed military coats and winter gear to homeless veterans, embroidered with QR codes linking to local services. shelter, job placement, mental health support. The idea had already gone viral. Partnerships were forming in 12 countries. Corporations were donating thousands. And it had all started with one jacket. In Geneva, as Lily stepped onto the stage, the massive auditorium fell silent. She placed her speech on the podium, but then, she looked out at the crowd, saw Douglas in the front row, and pushed the paper aside. My grandfather's jacket wasn't made of gold. It wasn't even in style. It was old, scratched, weather-worn. But it was stitched with stories of sacrifice, of strength, of survival. When I gave it away, I thought I was letting go of a memory. I didn't know. I was passing on a message. The audience leaned in. That message was simple: everyone matters. Even if they're forgotten. Even if they're alone. Even if they're standing outside in the rain, unnoticed by the world. She paused, looking down at her jacket. That one act of kindness didn't make me special. It reminded me that we're all capable of changing someone's story. You don't need wealth. You don't need power. You just need to care. As she stepped back from the podium, thunderous applause erupted. Douglas stood, leading a standing ovation. And somewhere deep in her heart, Lily could almost hear her grandfather's chuckle. "That's my girl," he used to say. Always leading with heart. Later that evening, as she flew back across the Atlantic, Lily gazed out at the clouds and clutched the sleeve of her jacket. She wasn't the same girl who once stood at a donation stall waiting for the day to end. She was someone who had learned that the smallest gesture, the quietest gift, can unlock destinies. Because kindness, true kindness, doesn't end with a thank you. It begins there. Storytelling and beyond. Subscribe now to follow more heartwarming stories of ordinary people who chose compassion and changed the world.